Hey, Dirty South folks. I just wanted to pop in here really quickly and sort of sum up some of the things that we talked about in the March 30th discussion board. We were doing the two basically cultural texts of combining this movement of outlaw country, what later sort of became alt country or alternative country, and then this movement of Dirty South hip hop, which maybe seems like a bit of a stretch, but I hope that we had the class on outlaw country. It feels like a year ago, right before we all left for break because of the coronavirus. But in that class, we talked a little bit about the reconfiguration of points of things that should be points of shame or should be dirty or should be contested as something to celebrate, right? So that we had Waylon Jennings talking about being from a small town and being an outlaw, not being someone that follows the rules, and that celebration of that kind of culture, the renegotiation of something that's dirty or contested into something that's a point of pride. And we talked about that as a response to a kind of establishmentarian idea of country music as being about glitz and sequins and silver dollars on cars and rhinestone suits but beyond that aesthetic and the ethos that it was reacting against, which was very much establishmentarian of the political time, so that Nixon being at the the reopening of the Grand Ole Opry when it moved, that album "Thank You, Mr. President" that Tex Ritter sort of narrated. And we talked about all of that stuff in Outlaw Country as being a response to that. So I hope you see, and from the very limited responses, I know you're all struggling sometimes to get stuff up on the discussion board. I would encourage you. It actually helps me to get through some of this stuff. And I want to just mention again, your discussion board posts do not have to be polished. They don't necessarily have to be on topic in the way, if you look at some of our responses from last week, we're sort of all over the place, and that's good. Remember, this is a messy class, and the more messy we get and dirty Souths, I think the better. But the responses were really interesting from the few of you who did respond, because we were talking about how we're in this generation where Dirty South hip hop has become sort of solidified in our mind as a marker of hipness or legible visibility. The visibility of Dirty South as being very much a marker of success. It's a successful genre. This is talking about a moment, and Richardson is talking about a moment, and all of these other texts, and also the book Dirty South, the noir book, which I don't think we ever got David's take on that. So I'd be interested in that if that ever materializes. But we're looking at that moment when this was very much not a point of pride. It was not a point of exceptionalism. It was this marginalized culture, was this marginalized idea of what that music could be. So it was existing on the margins. That's that moment when in 1973 or 4 where Outlaw Country was, and then of course in 5 years it was the highest selling country album. So we're sort of living in that moment now where we all know who Outkast is, we all know who these people are. We're in sort of the post Dirty South era, or the hyper Dirty South era, where now being a Dirty South artist has quite a bit of cachet, 3 6 Mafia winning Oscar awards and whatever. So it's hard for us to kind of go back sometimes and realize how contentious and contested that was. I think one of you mentioned when I sent that YouTube clip of Outkast winning the Best New Artist at the Source Awards, how shocked you were that, they were not immediately embraced with open arms, and that certainly wasn't the case. And so remember this, the idea of this class is to take these very dirty and contested notions of Southern identity and see how they're renegotiated into points of pride and what kind of cultural work that enables, both for the marginalized community, but also for the consumption of that. And I really do think, I hope you feel this way too, I really do think that connection is palpable between Outlaw Country in the 70s and the Dirty South hip hop movement in the late 90s or the early 2000s. The book, which we never really got to talk about all that much, is a really fascinating part of this, because you have a white author who's writing in a very specific genre, this noir genre, about all these questions of authenticity and exceptionalism, and they're all framed around music, right? So he's shepherding this young African American kid who's a Dirty South hip hop artist. You have the clash not just of generations, not just of races, but also exceptionalism in music, right? So this kid is producing music that's of the moment, that's from his neighborhood, that's talking about his pride and who he is. And then you have this white sort of detective person who's romanticized the notion of blues music, and that blues is the authentic music. And then in this really strange narrative where it's almost a conversion narrative, where he has to take this kid back to Mississippi, back to the roots of the blues music, convert him into that kind of authenticity. And it's there that the kid can find himself. I mean, it's a hugely controversial idea already, that, you know, you have this white authorship of Black identity through a white fantasy of roots, authenticity, you know, exceptionalism, all of these things that we get bandied around. But that we talked about the articulation of sorrow as being something that's key, those sorrow songs as something that's key also to the country aesthetic. So in this weird way, we're seeing in this book, Dirty South, this Nick Travers book, all of these things kind of bubbling up to the surface in very, very difficult and tricky ways. So if you didn't get a chance to read that book, I highly recommend going through it and seeing how this gets really muddy. I mean, literally muddy. This thing ends with a boat stuck in the mud, and the ways in which Dirty South hip hop operates as a cultural text that's illegible to this kind of white, upper middle class detective, and then the kind of conversion that goes back and forth with both of those. It's really fascinating, and has a lot of repercussions into what we're talking about. So anyway, we're going to be turning the corner and talking about a different kind of cultural product and text. In next week's class, hopefully more of you will find yourself compelled to keep the conversation going. It's really critical for me at this time to continue to have these discourse communities available to me, and to have these outlets and resources to hear what you say. I miss you guys so much. I miss the dynamic of our class and sitting around and talking about these things. But look, this is all we have. This is the best that we can do. So we can make do with what we have for right now. As always, if you have questions or comments or anything, please send them to me. I know we're all working diligently on final projects. I'm also working on a final project with you, so we're all right there in the fold together. But do reach out to me. I'd like to be a resource for you in whatever way you think I can be helpful. So until next week, I'll see you then. Bye.